Hello, I am Blaze and welcome back to Warframe. Continuing with the new Syndicate melee weapons, this time I'm going to go over Red Veil's offering, the Rakta Dark Dagger. To acquire the Rakta Dark Dagger yourself, you will need to either achieve the rank of Exalted with the Red Veil and then purchase the weapon for 125,000 standing, or as with other Syndicate and event weapons, head over to Warframe's trading community to buy it from another player. In either case, you will need to be at Mastery rank 8 and you will need to provide your own catalyst and weapon slot for it. The Rakta Dark Dagger's statistical improvements are very similar to the improvements for the Sancti Magistar, that being an improved base damage and attack rate. This brings the Rakta Dark Dagger up to 50 radiation damage at a baseline, and a 1.0 attack rate which makes it even faster than usual. Daggers generally having a higher animation speed to begin with. From there, the supplemental stats are fairly low, with a mere 5% critical hit chance and a 1.5 times critical damage multiplier with a 10% status chance. The dagger also comes along with an added V polarity in its mod slots, and has a dash polarity in its stance slot, matching the homing fang stance by default. This is a change from the base Dark Dagger, which has an R polarity as its default stance slot, which actually doesn't match either of the dagger stances. It's a good thing that they changed that, because carrying the R polarity over to the Rakta version would be even more stupid than the fact that the default Dark Dagger still has that as a default polarity in the first place. The weapon's status chance is fairly low, but it is worth remembering that the Red Veil also sells the Gleaming Blight augment mod for the Dark Dagger, which provides the Blight Syndicate effect as well as a 100% increase in status chance, and it still works for the Rakta version. This will push the status chance to 20%. Other mods will still just take the base 10% when adding further status chance, but this still serves an important purpose for the Rakta Dark Dagger being a status weapon. Interestingly, triggering Blight will not actually ruin your stealth if it goes off and doesn't kill anything. Enemies will start running around, but it will not actually count as being alerted. However, it will end your stealth affinity multiplier if the Blight effect actually kills anything. So if you do want to chain stealth kills, either going without Gleaming Blight or using the Rakta Dark Dagger just for quick melee will be in order. Though in these cases you will sort of be missing out on what actually makes the Rakta Dark Dagger special. That specialty being that, while equipped, each hit you land on an enemy that is currently under the effect of a radiation status effect will restore your shields. And if your Warframe has full shields, it will provide up to 1,200 overshields. Each individual strike will usually only grant a small charge, but this will add up quickly if you can lay into a target or two, and will add up to 1,200 overshields regardless of anything else. This does come with some limitations, the main one being that the overshield charge is fairly small, so you can't really rely on it too much to keep you topped up under heavy fire. The fact that its shielding also itself has its own issues, which I'll go into a bit more detail on later. Even with that limitation, the Rakta Dark Dagger remains very powerful and synergizes with a very large number of frames. Perhaps the most obvious, though this is dagger-wide, is that any Warframe that has an ability that can open up enemies to standing finisher attacks, coupled with the Covert Lethality Dagger mod, will allow guaranteed one-hit kills on any valid target for those stuns. This can be done with Warframe powers like Valkyr's Paralysis, Excalibur's Radial Blind, Ivara's Sleep Arrows, and so on. Other slightly less obvious synergies that are actually specific to the Rakta Dark Dagger include being useful for frames like Rhino or Notcha that can give themselves a third health bar of sorts in the form of Iron Skin and Warding Halo respectively, letting you build up your overshields easily while under fire, providing a little bit of buffer room and extra time to recast your Protective Shell ability mid-fight. Using Zephyr's Turbulence to avoid damage rather than absorb it will have similar benefits. Another major synergy is with Warframes that are able to guarantee a radiation status effect, namely Oberon's Smite and Reckoning powers. So this works really well on him thanks to his arsenal. One would also assume that Loki's Irradiating Disarm augment would give you plenty of enemies turned overshields on legs as well, but right now it actually doesn't, which is pretty dumb. Some speculation I've seen is that whatever the augment does isn't exactly recognized as a radiation status effect by the Rakta Dark Dagger. I hope this is just a bug and that it gets fixed, but for now, if you wanted to use the weapon with Loki, you may find it rather wanting. The Rakta Dark Dagger's overshield ability will also apply if you or someone else also happens to be carrying around a weapon that has the sequence effect from the parent sequence. which also delivers a guaranteed radiation status effect when it goes off. This is a little clunky if you're doing it on your own, but it is still something else that works. However, time to get to that issue with shields in general that I mentioned earlier. One important note about overshields is that, just like regular shields, armor doesn't reduce the damage your shields take in any way, and toxin damage will just bypass it entirely, as well as slash damage over time effects. So you won't be able to rely on having a big pool of shielding to save you from infested gas clouds or poisonous Eximus unit auras. So be sensible about it. The overshields you can get from the Rakta Dark Dagger is useful buffer room, but it is no substitute for being able to restore health or having more health in general. But it can help save you from a situation that may have otherwise reduced you to a heap on the floor. Aside from its main selling point of being able to give you overshields, there is yet another similarity with the Sancti Magistar in that the Rakta Dark Dagger also has its own semi-passive effect, which is pretty much completely forgettable. It's supposed to reduce the ability of enemies to detect you, which when playing with it honestly seems to be an extremely minor effect if it even really does anything at all. Enemies still seem to notice you from just as far away as usual. It may cause enemies to take slightly longer to go from a passive to alert state, but I honestly don't really notice anything especially convincing. If you need to be stealthy, just take Loki or Avara and use their invisibility powers like a sensible person. In any case, the mod loadout I have arrived at is as follows. Covert Lethality is basically an auto-include on Daggers, since it was given the effect of also adding 100% extra base damage. It's basically a spoiled strike mod without the downside, and with the additional upside of standing or stealth finishers being guaranteed kills. There is pretty much no reason not to include this. I also like using Gleaming Blight for the much needed added stats chance to take advantage of its radioactive overshield ability, and it will also put the Blight Viral Blast back onto the Rakta Dark Dagger. Primed Fury is perhaps an optional mod here since the Rakta Dark Dagger is fast anyway, but I included it just so I could really lay into targets quickly, due to my lack of respect for either of the dagger stances. Speaking of which, I have personally changed its stance polarity to match Pointed Wind, as I feel like it's generally more straightforward and also has somewhat better moveset damage multipliers. But that especially is going to be down to personal preference. If you would prefer to stick with Pointed Wind and save the effort of an extra Forma, then be my guest. Conspicuous by its absence on my own loadout is Weeping Wounds. I just couldn't decide what to get rid of in order to put it in there. I have body count to keep the combo multiplier damage bonus going, but getting Weeping Wounds in there would mean either removing Life Strike, Gleaming Blight, Prime Fury, Covert Lethality, or messing up the single added element combo, none of which I was able to justify personally. Though if you don't view one of those mods as being as important as I do, then that would be a fine candidate to swap out for Weeping Wounds. But honestly, I find it works fine enough as it is here. So, the Rakta Dark Dagger is pretty good in my opinion if it's paired with the right frames or in a team setting. It won't help you too much if you can't mitigate or avoid damage in some way, sadly, but it does come along with a quite useful and powerful effect if you can. Though always having radiation damage, and therefore the status effect as a possibility, can also itself be useful regardless, as it can cause enemies to fight amongst themselves instead of you, which can take some heat off of your own back, and of course in cases where an ancient healer decides to wander along and make surrounding units fucking invincible, it means that you can potentially keep swinging away and the radiation status effect will trigger, transfer to the ancient healer in question, and cause their bullshit eat all your damage aura to stop working for the status effect duration, which helps avoid a good deal of headaches. And on top of all of that, still remaining compatible with Gleaming Blight lets you periodically give all surrounding enemies a blast of viral damage and status to double up the damage that they receive too, as well as restoring some of your energy and boosting your movement speed for a while. The Rakta Dark Dagger really piles on the various unpleasant things it can do to your enemies and the number of ways it can benefit you, which I like. And it definitely helps refresh the Dark Dagger, as was the mandate of the new Syndicate melee weapons. Definitely a worthwhile weapon for the Tenno that wants to knife fight everything. Or just stab them right in the forehead. Seriously, that standing finisher animation is pretty cool. Thank you for watching my look at the Rakta Dark Dagger. All of your comments are appreciated, and I hope to see you around next time. For other Warframe content, you can give a click down below to check out my video on New Loka's Sancti Magistar melee weapon, or check out my opinions on Titania, or maybe some of my thoughts on Archwing. And as always, good luck, have fun, and take care.